What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Get Geek podcast, and today we're going to be talking about House of X and Powers of 10. It's been a long time coming. All of us have read this comic book except for one of us in its entirety. So you're going to get spoiled a little bit today, and by the way, spoilers. But before we get to that, let's do our introductions. I'm Jose.
I'm Wolfie.
AJ.
Walt.
Me. Elias.
What's Gucci, fam?
Ew.
Hey, you're the one that came up with that, okay? Well, you didn't come up with it,
no,
but
I didn't.
you brought it up several times.
Not several.
Yeah.
Can we just...
Now he's claiming innocence. But anyways, like I said, we're here to talk about House of X, Powers of 10, the comic that basically rebooted the X-Men in the Marvel Comics universe. And we're going to talk about the issues individually with some details. We're going to have some analysis. And at the end of these episodes, we're going to go into a little bit of what we think this means for the future of Marvel Comics and the MCU. So why don't we get started, guys? Where do we want to begin?
So I'm going to take a little bit of the lead on this one, and what we're going to do is we're going to review. Going to do this in a few sections today. We're going to do House of X 1, Powers of 10 1, House of X 2, Powers of 10 2, Powers of 10 3, and finish off with House of X 3. Now, the reason that we are going to go in that order is because that's the reading order that you're supposed to see this.
Yeah.
Read this. So. The way that this was launched is two separate miniseries. There are 6 issues each, but they intertwine with each other, which is important to the telling of the story, just because there are certain big, major reveals and key moments that happen in one comic that's going to affect how you read and understand the other. And so we'll get started right away. The House of X and Powers of X line there. House of X is written by Jonathan Hickman and penciler Pepe Larraz. He's the inker as well. Letterer Clayton Cowles, colorist Marte Garcia, which is kind of cool. Someone has my last name as their first name. With editors Jordan White and Annalise Bisa. And Powers of 10, also written by Jonathan Hickman, penciler R.B. Silva, as well as the inker, as well as Adriano Di Benedetto. Sounds like a mob name.
Hey!
Freaking
Clayton Cowles is the letterer, as well as Marte Garcia, also the colorist. So, House of X, we're going to start with House of X 1, the house that Xavier built. Xavier is... well, actually, before we get started, just a little bit of a backstory on this whole thing, right? Like, they've decided to give X-Men and the entire X universe to Jonathan Hickman to kind of redesign, and it's not so much a reboot,
right,
as more it's a relaunch, right? Because they're not doing new origin stories or anything like that. They canceled all the X-Men lines that were out. Gave us a few months before launching the Dawn of X series, which is all the new X-Men comic books that came out in October-ish, around there. Well, at the end of this. Mm-hmm. Which was prefaced with these two series to launch the whole Dawn of X series. So we're gonna start again with that first House of X, which is the house that Xavier built, and essentially you start with Xavier, who goes by X, I believe. I mean, that's kind of his code name. He's not really Professor X anymore. He's just X. He is walking, which is for some of you guys that have kind of strayed away from like comic books for a while. His mind has been transported to, let me just look this up, to Phantom X's body, and he's wearing a Cerebro helmet, and it's weird because he's always wearing this helmet. So there's been like some speculation as far as like, you know, what he looks like and stuff like that that'll kind of come into play later on. But it starts with this beautiful, very colorful, simple-looking panel with Xavier looking at some cocoons and some people hatching out of the cocoons, these amber-like cocoons, and he says, "To me, my X-Men."
That's a super awesome line.
Yeah, it's his line that he's always said. But my thing is that he's a little bit different when he says it. He looks very coy and, maybe a little bit sinister underneath his smile and stuff.
He looks like Mr. Fantastic from the Secret Wars comics with that crazy helmet he has on.
Well, yeah, that's true. That's true. He does.
From the Council of Reeds, I think that he was kind of like based on that.
Right, exactly. And from there, that's kind of like the opening scene, and then we see a kind of a montage scene, panels of various different X-Men all over the world picking and planting flowers, these very specific purple-looking flowers, which we have no idea what they are as of yet. And we fast forward to Magneto, who's meeting a batch of ambassadors from all over the world, because at the moment, Magneto is representing Krakoa, which is the New Mutant state, right? And in this New Mutant state, what he's aiming to get is amnesty for all mutants worldwide, in exchange for these flowers that happen to give powers. Each of the flowers have different kind of powers, different not powers, so to speak, but like cures for humanity. It gives the human species longevity. It cures diseases such as cancers and so on and so forth. So they're kind of the majority of all it's all based on giving like humanity an extension on their life, right? Because they believe that the inevitability is that there will no longer be the human race and everything is just going to be everyone's going to be mutants essentially. So they're kind of like biding and waiting their time. And from here, you have 1 second. There
I gotta say, I feel like I have to go back and read the comics so you can read all the little interludes and like information in between,
right?
There's to find out some more. Especially the first one.
There's a lot of like detail heavy stuff, especially when you haven't read them in a while. But essentially,
I feel like 2/3 of that first comic is like not even comic. It's like background stuff, which is really cool. But it's interesting, like how much reading is. Because I looked when I first read it, I like saw how many pages it was. I'm like, Lord, this is one of the longest graphic novels ever. And then like you go through it relatively quickly, and you realize that the rest of it is just to explain a little bit more about the world.
Right. So what these flowers do? The other thing about the thing. One of the things about the island of Krakoa, which is now the New Mutant Station, the New Mutant Nation, is that Krakoa also allows people like mutants to be able to teleport anywhere around the world, which is where what they're doing with these flowers. Wherever they plant the flowers, that's where they use the flowers to be able to teleport to these places. And one of the places that we're drawn to is what they call the Jerusalem habitat, which is where these ambassadors are meeting Magneto after receiving a telepathic worldwide message to all of civilization, declaring themselves as an independent state. From there, we go to Jean Grey, who's leading a mutant residence from the X Mansion to Krakoa, and we get a little bit more details on like what life on Krakoa looks like, and there's a lot of world building going on here, and after that, one thing that happens in these books, which is really cool, is kind of the page breaks that Hickman gives us, right? So whenever he's going to change from essentially one whole scene or storyline, he gives us a informative page break, gives us a little bit of information that also helps towards world building, but it also kind of gives us the ability to like transport ourselves to a completely new, unrelated scene, which is what happens here, because now we go near the sun where spacecrafts are approaching a station known as the Forge, the home base of a human group called Orcus. Orcus is a self-proclaimed last hope for humanity, made up of various members of human organizations such as AIM, SHIELD, Hydra, Alpha Flight, and others that are all looking to prevent the extinction of Homo sapiens at all cost. Meanwhile, at the same time, we have a team made up of Mystique, Sabretooth, and Toad that are infiltrating a base of damage control, as we're told, looking for information on the database. We don't know exactly what they're looking for, but Sabretooth ends up getting captured by the Fantastic Four, while Mystique and Toad escape, which is going to come into play later on.
100%.
With
Yeah.
the information that was stolen.
Yeah.
With the information that's stolen. Again, we don't know what the information is as of yet.
Many Sabretooths died for this information.
You know, and you know, and so one of the cool things here is you know, in this like little scene where Sabretooth gets captured, you have a pretty cool interaction between Cyclops and the Fantastic Four,
Yeah.
where Cyclops, seeing and hearing that Sabretooth has been captured, he comes essentially to Sabretooth's rescue, but not as Cyclops the hero, but as Cyclops the ambassador of the Krakoan nation.
It's crazy.
Right? So he's like, you know, again, they have like all mutants have amnesty.
Diplomatic immunity for
Yeah,
Sabretooth.
diplomatic immunity. So he goes ahead and takes Sabretooth. He doesn't take Sabretooth off his hands yet, sorry. But he is trying to. He's telling him, hey, like all mutants have amnesty. And Mr. Fantastic, Reed Richards, is not really allowing him to just take him by force. So Cyclops backs off and he's like, don't worry. You can keep him for now, but we'll come back for him.
We got this.
Which is, again, awesome how it comes into play later on. I love how they kind of are doing this through through diplomatic means.
Cyclops is very. It's not what I expected from Cyclops, but I don't really know much about him. But he's still. I like the way they do Cyclops in this in the comic book series.
There's more to talk about when it comes to Cyclops later and his relation to Professor X and to some of the other leaders of the X-Men. And that's a big thing about it too. We'll talk about that when we get to that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to get like your impressions of like the characters and all that stuff, and whatnot right after the we kind of recap this issue. But from there we go to Magneto, who's still leading the ambassadors through several like Krakoan habitats. He's showing them exactly what Krakoa is, what their aim is, and this, that, and the other. Kind of giving all these ambassadors across from all over the world a little bit of like a tour of their habitat, so that they can understand what they're trying to achieve. And where are we? Oh, right. So from there. It turns out that he's not really giving them a tour, so to speak, to the ambassadors, but he's kind of like owning them, okay? Because it turns out that like the ambassadors weren't actually already sent there to take a look. They were there kind of to like a little bit of disinformation. And it turns out that Magneto has employed the powers of the Stepford Cuckoos, I believe they're called.
Yeah, that's correct.
Right? And the
White-
Cuckoos
White
are
Queen
they're
clones
White
or
Queens,
something
what
like that?
cloned or daughters?
Daughters,
Right? They're the daughters of Emma
triplets.
Frost. Yeah, they're
If I
triplets who
remember
are
correctly.
also telepathic, and all the while that he's giving them this tour, they've already like entered their minds, realized what their real intentions are. It turns out that one is not an actual ambassador; that he's like the head of the state's Chinese state science office. And they've already decided that they want to agree to their, you know, to recognizing them as a nation state so that they can get these flowers. Same thing with another one is an actual ambassador, but he's also part of a private sector pharmaceutical company, and he's looking to see how he can monetize and make money off of this. And then you have another one that's an operator, who's carrying a weapon, and Magneto immediately just, you know, flings him in the air, catches takes apart his gun and completely disassembles it. And it turns out that his whole purpose to bringing them here to Krakoa is not really to sort of give them this tour, so to speak, as even though that was the initial premise, but it was more to let them know and put them on notice. Yeah. You know, it was to put them on notice that like they basically have to take this deal of recognizing Krakoan nationhood and the mutants' immunity and amnesty, and you know, and whatnot to come to Krakoa, because the end is inevitable in their view. In their view, humans are eventually going to cease to exist. Mutants are going to take over, and what they want to do is give humans enough time to live out their lives while their species grows on Krakoa. And he ends it with an awesome line where he says, you see, I know how you humans love your symbolism almost as much as you love your religion. So he wanted to bring him to the Jerusalem habitat and to make them understand that they have new gods. That's kind of where we end on the first issue.
You have new gods now.
The negotiations were short.
Yeah, it's basically him just saying, like, this is the new paradigm, this is the new dynamic. We've always said it, like, listen, this is the next we are the next evolution of the species, and instead of doing what usually happens in this situation and us wiping you out, which is what evolution basically tends to do, he's like, look, we're not going to harbor any ill will towards you to a certain extent. We're not going to attack you. But we also want you to realize that, like, we are the future, and this is how it's going to be. There's nothing you can do about it. And like you said, Gabe, like, you're going to have to take this deal, but we are being courteous enough to explain it to you beforehand.
So let me ask you guys to kind of do a little bit of a round table here. What were your guys' thoughts on, like, as far as, like, the exposition, the dialogue, the art especially? Is anything that, like, stood out to you story-wise, art-wise, and any specific panels that you guys, like, just kind of, like, popped out at you?
Well, I will say that, like you had said earlier, I really like that quick confrontation between Cyclops and the Fantastic Four, where he basically comes to them and says, like, you have to give me Sabretooth. This is how things are going to be. He has diplomatic immunity. We will deal with him in the way that we see fit because he's one of ours, and all mutants now are going to be under our umbrella. You have no jurisdiction, in a sense, to do anything to Sabretooth. I thought that was a really cool confrontation where you got to see some of the characters' personalities shine. But it was also kind of interesting to me because, as we'll see later, like, this kind of defines who Cyclops is in the X-Men hierarchy now.
Right.
And again, like I said, we'll get to that when we get to that point in the comics. The art is definitely amazing in this. I think, actually, you know, the art is a little different, obviously, in House of X and Powers of 10. I think I actually prefer the art in House of X a little bit more.
Okay.
If I'm going to talk about how the art is. The art is great in both of them, but I kind of like the style of the art in House of X a little bit more.
Okay.
And I think the other thing that's really cool is that this is kind of a very overtly political, like, X-Men comic. And X-Men has always been based a little bit on society and politics to a certain extent.
Yeah, exactly.
I kind of like how they're doing that. Yeah, like, it's definitely not a huge departure, but what I really like is how much focus it has because of the overarching story that's going to be told, how much focus they have on how things go politically, and, you know, the interactions with humans that Magneto has are really cool, like we said.
Yeah.
So overall, like, in terms of setting me up for excitement with this whole comic book series, as soon as I read this, I was like, this is going to be good. Yeah. And I really, really enjoyed this issue.
Cool.
First and foremost, I was surprised with where they're taking Charles Xavier in the first place. And this kind of ties into the politics of X-Men. Because generally, you have Charles Xavier as the... No, that's Magneto's Malcolm X. Charles Xavier is MLK. Not anymore. Now he's working with Magneto.
Right.
And while
we're going to get to exactly how that came to be.
Yeah.
Which is going to be super, super important. But yeah, it's crazy to see the fact that they're working together.
Well, it's not completely far out there because have they worked together in the past?
They have, but they've never worked together on a as a partnership. They've worked together reluctantly, right? And that's one thing that I do need to kind of, like, make a note of, that in the comic, one of the things that struck me big was that in this very first initial comic, where even though the comic opened up with the image of Xavier and the opening line was, "To me, my X-Men," those are the only lines that he speaks in the entire issue. The rest of the comic is taken over by Magneto, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, when they first see Magneto, they ask him, like, "Oh,
where's Charles?"
They ask Charles, like, "Are you leading this whole thing or whatever?" And he's like, No. I come to you just as an ambassador of Charles." You know, so Magneto has very obviously taken a secondary step under Charles, even though they are working in unison. So
right. He's almost like the spokesman for
an
Charles
ambassador.
Xavier.
I think to your point also, Andre, is that what's interesting is if you read about, like, Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X in real life, as you read some of the things that Martin Luther King Jr. said and wrote in his later years, as he started to become a little bit more disillusioned with his path and with what he was trying to do, he actually did start to skew a little bit more towards Malcolm X's way of seeing things. So this is almost like a parallel in the comic book, which maybe is intentional, maybe it's not, but I still think it's pretty cool that like they kind of did that in here, because that really speaks to the real life.
That's
dynamic.
really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you think about the art?
And I'm sorry I'm going to take this to DC, but the art style vaguely reminds me of what I saw in the Dark Side War run. Like there was a very... They play a lot with lighting in that.
Right. That's one very specific thing that they do a really good job of, like, the lighting and stuff. Like when they're outside, all the panels reflect exactly where the sun is, where the sunlight's coming from, based on like which side the characters are facing, which is really cool how they did that.
Yeah, they had a very similar thing in that run of comics, the Dark Side War, also. So I appreciated that a lot.
Oh, nice, cool. Walt, any thoughts?
So, one of the things that I found interesting is it's very political, but I think there's a lot of religious themes in here also.
Yeah.
Because just like you said, the very first scene is the birthing chamber, right?
Yes, the birthing chamber.
And you do have these mutants who we will find out who they are later on in the comic, right?
Which is mind-blowing also.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we can go to that real quick, just because that first image, what we see is we see two beings coming out of these orbs, but you see one being very obviously look
Who
like
it
he's
is.
Cyclops, right?
Exactly.
Because he's being birthed and he has rays sort of emanating from his eyes.
So it's one of those things where you look at that particular scene and you're like, what in the world is going on here? Because, in our minds, we already know that there's a Cyclops in existence, but yet we're seeing
Him being
birthed,
right?
and as an adult.
Yeah, as an adult,
Which is even
is
more
super
mind-blowing.
weird, yeah.
Have a
But-
freaking alien pod, which is like, what?
Yeah. So the thing that struck me is that Professor X here is almost like a holy figure in the way that they portray him in these panels, right?
Yeah.
Because he's standing there, he's watching over the birthing of these mutants, and he says almost like a come to Jesus moment. He was like, "Come to me, my children.
Yes,
Come to me, my
exactly.
X-Men."
Yes.
And what I find interesting, and this gets told more, you see it more as you continue to read the book. Like you said, he always has the helmet, so you never see his face. And again, I go back to the religious text where it's like, you can't see the face of God because you won't be able to handle it, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. So again, it's he's like this mythic, godlike figure in this book where it's like, I'm doing these great acts of miracles and stuff like that. The other thing that I find interesting is
wanted
that
to say really quickly in a response actually to find a specific example. If you remember in the Bible, the reason that God appears as a burning bush is because his real visage, his real image would kill Moses.
Exactly.
And it
That's what I'm
ages
saying.
him just by seeing the flame in the bush.
So
I'm sorry, go
again,
ahead.
you cannot look upon the face of God, right? The other thing that I found interesting, and we spoke about this very briefly today, right? The habitat that they choose is Jerusalem,
Right.
in the Middle East. And again,
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
I find that interesting, but I find the whole dynamic of what happens with Krakoa very interesting also. And again, this is kind of like the persecution of the mutants, the persecution of the Jewish people. We find out later that there may be a Holocaust. They go out and they create their own nation, much like the nation of Israel. So again, you have these parallels, that's going on. The artwork, though, is fantastic. And there's one character that I love the way they do him, and that's Magneto.
Yeah,
Magneto
I love how they did
is
Magneto, yeah.
incredibly drawn in this comic. There's a shot toward the very end where he's talking to the ambassadors. That's the one that I'm talking about, and you see
With the lighting that AJ's talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Going back to what AJ said, the lighting that they show him in, and that pose where it's an imposing pose to say, "Hey, we're not playing. We're not giving you the opportunity to negotiate.
Right.
This is your new norm.
He's very much a godlike figure in that image.
Again, right, exactly. So, X-Men's never been shying away from religious themes, political themes, and again, this comic continues that. It's very interesting how they do Professor X, though. That's all I'm going to say, and we can get into the rest of it.
Right.
later.
So, I mean, just to go back to that point, he did specifically choose Jerusalem because, like I said, like he said, he chose it because he knows how much the humans love symbolism, especially in religion.
Exactly.
And he wanted to use the Jerusalem as the place where it's the place where they choose to announce that
Mecca,
here
right?
we are.
The new
and
God.
these are your new gods. You know what I mean?
They're
Kind of like
very
the birthplace
specific
of a lot of gods. Yeah.
them choosing that place.
Right.
Yeah. And I
And-
found that very interesting.
And to the design of Magneto, one of my favorite parts is seeing that X-Men logo on his belt.
Oh,
which we've
he's
seen him
awesome.
before in Age of Apocalypse, when he was in the alternate kind of reality, the de facto leader of the X-Men in kind of like a what-if scenario.
What was that, Age of X, I think?
Age
it Age of X?
Age of X. Well, it's Age of
I don't
X.
remember. Or Age of Apocalypse.
Age of Apocalypse,
Duh.
right? But
that's the
Age
one.
of Apocalypse. So that was cool to see. I always loved Age of Apocalypse. Actually, Age of Apocalypse is more or less around the time that I got really into X-Men with Joe Madureira and all that stuff. Eli, your impressions. I would love to.
There's this
Keep going.
There's this one specific scene that I really like. It's at the very beginning, and I know we've already talked about this, but there's this one scene where it's just Magneto, and he's just literally he has his hands to the side,
No, that's
Professor X.
Professor X.
Professor X. Professor X. Yeah, sorry.
It's fine because it's weird how he looks. He's not.
Yeah,
That's not how he normally looks.
Yeah,
right?
and that's what I'm gonna talk about. It's very unsettling.
Yeah, because the only thing you
Like
see,
Meta said.
I was gonna say it
AJ.
real quick is
AJ.
the only thing you see. You don't see his face. You just see this like a sly smile on his face, almost like a very. It's almost an evil smile. It really almost is like an evil smirk on Professor X's face in that one
And
panel.
I have no idea why, but it kind of gave me the creeps just looking at the way he smiled. And
Yeah.
it's very
It's very different.
it's very different, and especially this whole entire comic book, there's this one scene. I think we've already gone over most of the stuff that I want to talk about, but there's this one scene with Cyclops, and he's just like we said, he's on.
He's very
he's-
straight to
yeah.
straight to the point.
Yeah, and he's in a way, kind of not really negotiating, but he knows what he's talking about. It sounds like he absolutely knows what he's talking about.
He's very alpha and witty,
Yeah.
which
Which is
different
not
from,
what. Yeah,
It's
that's
different
not
from
what he is.
old Cyclops. Maybe the Cyclops that we grew up with, that was very kind of Captain America-ish and goody
He
two
was the
shoes.
company man.
Freaking Boy Scout.
Whatever Professor X said, he would do.
Right,
you know?
but
But
I
in a
think,
meek way.
but the thing is, Cyclops in the last 10 years have taken a turn because at one point, he completely rebelled. He was a villain basically and all that, and he kind of basically had enough, you know.
That was the Uncanny X-Men run.
Yeah,
where
so-
it was mostly about him and his almost. Well, we'll get into.
Well, yeah,
that,
I
you know
mean,
what I'm saying? Yeah.
things kind of get crazy with Cyclops, but I like how they reinvented him to finally be we already have one Captain America, we don't need another one. So that's kind of that's the first issue of House of X, and now we kind of have the next issue, which is going to be Powers of 10. So now Powers of 10 is really interesting, and the Powers of 10 issues are mainly interesting because of the format of the issues. So, the main format of the issues is we have these segmented pages or sections where we go through a section where they display that it's year one. We don't exactly know what year one is, but we have year one, then we have year 10, then year 100, and then year 1000. And we're essentially seeing different timelines, all in the X-Men history, essentially. The first page is going to start with essentially like a small panel of each one of the years. Year one at the and we're going to kind of like describe basically what the entire book says about each section in one piece. As the book is read, it's when you turn a page, it's a different section, and when you read the entire book, you get the entire story of each one of these segments, right? But essentially, in the year one segment of the book, at a fair in Oxford, Charles Xavier meets Moira Kinross, eventually McTaggart. Moira McTaggart, for those of you guys that follow up with X-Men, who asks him why he's smiling. And Charles explains that recently he has had the most wonderful dream of his place in a better world, referring to the eventual creation of Xavier's school and the X-Men. Again, this is Charles Xavier, essentially when he first kind of envisions his dream of changing the world's mind about mutants and making the world a better place for mutants. Moira stops for a second before stating, well, here's the thing, Charles. It's not a dream if it's real. And this is important because it's going to come into play a little later. Charles questions whether they have met before, which Moira responds to by asking him to read her mind. And when he does, Charles reads Moira's mind and his eyes go wide in astonishment. And we don't know yet why, but we will soon. The next segment is going to be the year 10. Okay? So in year 10, in the present day, Mystique and Toad arrive on Krakoa after the infiltration of damage control, which happened in House of X1. Okay, Mystique takes the flash drive with her findings on it to Xavier and Magneto, who entered into a computer to view the contents. That's it. Now we get to the year 100 segment of the book, where we're in a really, really dark future where the Earth is ruled by a man-machine called Nimrod the Lesser, and his Sentinels. The remaining mutants on Earth are either those from before the current war or chimeras, which are mutants genetically engineered by Mr. Sinister to have multiple abilities all at once. A small team of mutants led by a chimera named Rasputin the Fourth, who has the powers of Shadowcat and Colossus. Essentially, you can phase through and then, completely become metallic. They escape from a group of Sentinels, but lose two of their own in the process. And from there, Rasputin and the remaining mutant Cardinal escape to arrive at their base through a Krakoan flower, where they are met by the only remaining mutant resistance, including Wolverine, who's all grayed out, finally aging, a little bit kind of akin to Old Man Logan, and Zorn. And if you do not know who Zorn is the alias kind of two characters in the X-Men world. He was created by Grant Morrison back in the day, so I definitely highly recommend that you guys check out some of the older stuff. It's it's New X-Men by Grant Morrison. Super awesome line. The art's a little bit weird on that one. Lines are kind of weird, but anyway, super great read. Anyway, so they escape to the base where they have Wolverine and Zorn, and Rasputin and Cardinal confirm their mission was not in vain, and Wolverine leads them to the Old Man, which we don't know exactly as of yet. And then the last segment of the book is year 1000. In the archives of Nimrod the Greater, a blue-skinned being known as the Librarian converses and speaks with Nimrod on the final fate of his hive mind experiment, which proved pointless due to the surprising final fate of the war. He then looks at a nature preserve where two nude human figures are side, Adam and Eve, don't know, reflecting that it is important to keep a record of the great sins of history so that they never have dominion again. Now, that's Powers of 10, okay? Which it took. I had to read it a few times. I think a few of us had to read it a couple times because
it's a total shift.
It's so different from like a typical comic that you would read. Like every page is a new time shift essentially.
Yeah.
One page is year one, then you turn the page and now we're 100 years later. Then we turn the page again. No, 10 years, then 100 years later we turn the page again. Then we're 1,000 years in the future. We turn the page again and we go back to year one. So it was a little bit difficult to follow and read. But reactions, thoughts.
Well, it's interesting that it's called Powers of 10, and like, you know, everybody probably looks at it at first and calls it Powers of X. I did.
Yep.
But then when you start to read it, you see the reasoning behind that. Obviously, the big jumps in time. This issue definitely confused me. I think we all kind of agree. Like, it was awesome. We had to read it a couple of times, but
It's sort of kind of like The Witcher.
yes, like episode 1 of The Witcher. But after that, it gets a little bit more. Well, at least for me, it's gotten a little bit more clear. And again, I
Just
like
like
The
The
Witcher.
Witcher.
I like The Witcher. I'm not complaining about it. But
It gets clearer, just like The Witcher.
what I like about this issue is it starts to give you a sense of the scale of this relaunch. We're going to call it a relaunch, I guess, instead of a reboot, right? Is a better way to put it. Although, when you see how the story goes, it is kind of a reboot.
It's a soft reboot.
Yeah, it's a soft reboot.
Yeah.
Made possible by like how the story goes, but like it's hard to form a lot of impressions about this other than, like I said, you start to get a sense of where this is going to go, because if you're jumping 1,000 years in the future, you're jumping 100 years in the future, you're at 10 years in the future, and you see how far things have progressed and how bad things have gotten, or I guess good, depending on like which side you're on, because
Well, is it ever really good for the mutants?
no, it never is.
You know?
No.
Mutants always have a terrible future.
Exactly.
But it makes you wonder, like, what happens to all the other heroes in the Marvel Universe, because that's something that doesn't always get approached or talked about. I mean, you assume they're all dead, and sometimes they will specify that a little bit, but all the other superheroes in the Marvel Universe kind of get left out. And to me, it's also kind of interesting. Yeah, like they never really address it. In some of the comics they do, but in this one they don't address it to great detail,
Right.
which is okay because we're not focusing on them, right? But like, just on that point, like, if the X-Men like basically always end up like destroying the whole universe, man, it kind of sucks. Or at least like the conflict always ends up with like humans and mutants killing each other, all the humans dying, all the mutants dying, everybody on
Right,
Earth
like the
dying.
inevitability, right?
Yeah, like it always ends badly for the X-Men, but they're always jumping back in time to like fix things. And as we'll see, that kind of like comes into play later on. It's not specifically a time jump, right?
Right.
But
it's
we
a different
see,
thing.
it's a
Yeah,
little
we
bit
don't want to
different,
go
and it's
into it.
brilliant.
Yeah,
It's a different
you know, for some of you guys that are still reading along.
Yeah, you can stop here. I
But
guess.
there's there's not like for me there wasn't it was a good book to read just so to get introduced to these timelines, but there's not much that I could actually grab from these timelines.
No.
There's not much of anything.
They're just
Breadcrumbs.
setting up. They're
yeah,
setting
it's
up.
just all set up, right?
Like, you can't really expect too much from like the backstory, because you don't. I mean, you want to grab the information, but you don't want to expect too much of like the action and all of that from like background information.
Yeah, and you're jumping right into the middle of these storylines in a way. You know, you're jumping
Right,
right into the middle of the timeline at the 1 year, year 1, year 10, year 1,000, year 100. You're jumping right into the middle of something, and you kind of don't know exactly what's going on, but you do kind of see some small connections between them.
The one thing that I
So-
appreciate about these books is that we get those little data dumps in the pages.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's
it's-
something that I have to go back and read through all
Right,
of it again.
right,
and
yeah.
I do.
you get a lot of information, and the reason I appreciate it is because you're not using the characters to to do exposition on this, which kind of can take you out of it. They're just saying, okay, well, we're going to keep with the story. The characters are going to do what they're going to do, and then the exposition is going to be some of these data dumps that we have
Yeah.
here. You know what I'm saying?
I was gonna say this, and I think AJ had a point to make, so I'll let him speak. But like this strikes the right balance, because I hate to bring it up, but we talk about Rise of Skywalker and how like you have to read outside of the movie to find out stuff.
It's all
here.
there.
It's right in the damn comic.
Right, exactly.
And it's not necessarily very different in the way that they do it, but it's interesting because instead of like being in a separate novel or a separate book, here it's just like, okay, here are some details about the entire about the X-Men universe that already exist. It's not like it's something that they're just creating out of thin air like they did with Rise of Skywalker to explain some of the plot points. This is something that they're just explaining, like, to those who are maybe new readers of the X-Men or those who haven't read it in a while. They're just bringing back some of those details that
Yeah.
are going to be
Yeah,
important.
we're gonna sacrifice a page or two here and fill you in on the things that you may not either remember or you need that's necessary to understand some of the things going forward. And you get it ahead of time, and some of it, pays off toward the end, but at least you're getting it there.
You know what it's kind of like. I'm sorry, and I'll definitely let you speak. It's kind of like when you get to the beginning of like the next episode on like a streaming service or on TV, and they give you the little dump of what's happened previously on. Yeah, exactly. The recap.
It's sort of like that. I
But
would
you
say.
know why I say that though?
Yeah.
Like it's not exactly like that. But the reason that I'm saying that is because often when you get those recaps, what you see in those recaps is going to relate to the episode coming forward.
Right,
Like, your
but
episode's about to
my
happen.
thing is that like the data dumps, some of the data dumps do that, but some of them are really, really important to the future of the book. Like it's like, okay, we want to kind of give you this little backstory where you're not really going to understand what's going on right now.
Pay off later.
But you get to pay off later. Whereas we were talking about this a while back when we were first reading Dawn of X, the House of X, where it's like this is, back in the day, if you need, this is all information that was really, really important, but writers had to figure out a way how to get that information to the reader through the dialogue exposition that was given by the character. So then you would have pages of like a million bubbles of dialogue just to give you some of this like data that you need to know and understand.
It's a clunky way of doing it.
But yeah, but it made it really difficult. You know what I mean? And I think this is really cool because now like the dialogue and the conversation is straightforward, good, just straight up character building, and then the data dumps give you the world building aside from like the imagery that we see.
Yeah,
so
you don't.
AJ's been dying to.
You don't have a character that's just exposition man or exposition woman.
Yes.
Go for it, AJ.
So initially, when I read this comic, I did have a takeaway, but that was before I knew about the greater context of Powers of 10. What I basically took away from it was, okay, year 1, this is how it starts. Year 10, this is the actual thing. Year 100, oh, well, it sucks and it doesn't work. Year 1000, it really sucks. Oh, wow, this is not going to go well at all.
Yeah, exactly.
That was my initial takeaway from that. But once you complete like the whole thing, it's something completely different.
Right, because you find out that is, without spoiling, you find out that is.
There are certain factors that are influencing
I'm not gonna
this.
say it. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
say it, because it's going to give too much away if I make any kind of point of what you see. All right.
And so Eli, your impressions? Because Eli you haven't read everything. How far have you gone so far, as far as the books go?
I think I'm up to
I want to know where we're gonna start looking for reactions. after the
Powers of
spoilers.
X2.
Powers of 10-2. Okay, cool.
X2.
So he's like 4 issues in.
X2.
10.
I'd rather say X.
That ruins.
It's
like,
a Roman
the point.
numeral.
Pox.
But
'Cause
still.
remember, the whole point is that it's actual powers of 10 in time.
But it sounds better with X.
No, it
doesn't.
No.
doesn't.
Yeah, it does.
Anyway,
Impressions.
Eli,
Tell us
impressions on Powers of 10x to 1. Sorry.
X. Powers of
Confusing
X2.
us.
Power.
First issue. Don't confuse it. First
Pow-
issue of Powers of
Yes.
X-Men United.
X, whatever.
First issue?
Yeah, that's what we're on. Where are you?
We're up to
Powers of,
second.
no, Powers of X1.
Oh my god, I forgot. I'm getting confused by the timelines. I mean the comic book
In
thing.
reading it, I was confused, so I understand. But
Hello.
this is the one where we first see them jump through time. So what did you think about that issue? Like we don't get much here. We just see Professor X. We see the X-Men 10 years in the future in Krakoa. We see the future where things are not going very well for the X-Men, and then we see the future with Nimrod, the Sentinel guy.
I mean, I think you can agree. I think that like there was a little bit of confusion when you first read it. Like, what am I reading? I don't get this, right?
A tad bit. And yeah, it wasn't my favorite comic book. I mean,
Yeah, the
issue.
Yeah.
No,
I think in certain ways I can see that not being the case for a lot of people unless you finish the entire series.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Like The Witcher.
there is.
Leave it alone.
The
Stop.
Witcher actually does have exposition man too, though.
Huh?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, we're off topic here.
Toss a coin to your Witcher. Sorry, continue.
I know you guys are gonna hate me for this, but I found this one part. I think it was like one of the years, year 100, the war. I found that part corny.
Oh my god.
Why though?
Okay.
Think
Yeah,
everything
Tell us
is
why you think it's
corny.
funny.
I have no idea why I find it corny. It's just that I do not like that part at all.
What part?
But what about it? There has to be something that makes you react that
The
way
fact
to
that
it.
there's a war against human and mutants and like, come on, you've done that like how many times in the comic books?
Okay.
That's a
Yeah, but it's an
staple
ongoing
of
thing.
the mutants, though.
I know, but that's
I have to say
I think
to this
Eli's
young
looking
man,
for something different.
you
Yeah,
still
I
need
am.
to read more of the comics to understand why that is.
Not
You
only
really do.
that, it's
but out of issue 2. That's what I'm saying. Out of issue 2.
No, that's issue 1. Remember, it's Powers of X or
Issue
10,
1.
whatever you want to call it, issue 1. Because remember, you got to jump from comic to comic. I know it's
Yeah,
a little
it,
confusing.
okay. Can I just say issue 1, whatever. But yeah. So it wasn't my favorite.
okay. That's okay. All right. I mean, I think the general impressions. I think the art was pretty much on par.
Yeah, the art was
I
definitely
mean, it is very similar, although like the change in timelines also has a change in like the environment, which is cool to see. But anyway, moving along, now we kind of have one thing that's really really important to kind of denote is that at the end of every issue, it has the reading order. Now, what's special about this reading order is that the reading order has all 12 issues, the dates that they're going to come out, but very specific issues are highlighted in red, and you just have no idea what you're looking at, obviously, but there's a reason why they were highlighted in red from the very first issue. If you go to the back of House of X 1, the reading order it's exactly the same, and you see that House of X number 2 is in red, which for right reason is going to denote something very, very important happening, a big event. So
Huge event. Huge event. We've talked
Huge.
about this. I think this is huge.
It's
this is
bigly.
huge. It's bigly. It's the biggest.
This is the biggest reveal in comics in recent
I
memory.
think it's the biggest reveal in it's definitely the biggest reveal in X history period.
Yeah, actually, yeah, because it puts context on every single X-Men comic you've ever read in your entire existence on this planet.
Huge. Now,
Tell us about it.
So we get to House of X2, and essentially what we see Moira Kincross, here later known as Cowan, Moira Cowan, which is weird, right? Because we've always known her as Moira McTaggart, right? Now, here we see her living a very unassuming life as a teacher with a husband and 3 children, and Moira later dies peacefully at the age of 74 from natural causes. That's what we're told. And, at first glance, we're like, what is going on? And then we see that after her death, Moira suddenly finds herself back in her mother's womb with all of her memories from her previous life. Okay? And over here, we're basically told that Moira is actually a mutant, and she has been all this time. The entire X-Men universe that we've had, like in all this time that we've had Moira has been a mutant this entire time, and she's known about it. Okay, from this point on.
What?
Yeah.
Mind blown.
She obviously realizes it from the moment that she's born. I believe she starts talking from the moment that she's born because she has
Talking,
all her
walking.
memories. She's talking and walking. She
In the
has
womb.
all. In the womb she's
all
talking.
of her memories from her previous.
Yeah, she has all the memories from her previous life.
Back here.
Realizes that she's a mutant, and she does conceal her nature as best as she can. She conceals the fact that she's a mutant as best as she can because of her abilities, you could say, and all the knowledge that she has from her past life. She's considered a prodigy, and she decides to become an academic in biology and psychology at Oxford so that she can try to figure out what's going on with her and who she is and all that. After 20 years of research, she spots her former classmate Charles Xavier revealing himself as a mutant on television. Realizing that this is a possible opportunity, she takes a flight to America that proves fatal after it crashes in the ocean. So, Moira dies again.
Which is crazy.
Once again, she's born, and in this life, Moira instead decides to focus on anthropology and genetics and seeks out Xavier while at Oxford. So she still plans on, like, all right, in my last life, I ended up dying. I died on a plane crash. I have to relive my whole life again until I'm in college again and I can meet Xavier. Right?
Just make sure don't take that plane.
Yeah, just don't take that plane. So she seeks out Xavier while she's at Oxford, but Xavier's arrogance Which, it's funny enough, if you guys remember in X-Men First Class, he was very arrogant in that movie too.
Yes, he
you
was.
You know what I mean? And I thought that was a really awesome, I don't know if he was ever portrayed to be like truly arrogant in the comics, even when they had scenes of him being young. But I wonder if this was a decision that was based off of that movie. Like, what came first, the movie or?
It's also kind of like that in Dark Phoenix, and that whole series of comics or that whole series of movies. He's kind of like a little different, a little more arrogant.
He's like edgier and stuff like that, which is I think what they were trying to do. But I think they kind of ran with it. That's that was one of my favorite parts of like that week series of movies is Xavier being like edgy and kind of cool and all that stuff.
They balanced,
before he became
they brought him and Magneto a
he
little
needed
bit.
to be humbled.
Yeah, he needed to be humbled before that. Yeah.
We got to the
But they brought him and Magneto a little closer together. You know what I mean? They made Magneto a little more like him, and they made him a little bit more like Magneto in those movies. If you look at it, because Magneto, you have how
those movies were all over the place.
Yeah, but they were the best part of it. But anyway.
Yeah.
No,
absolutely.
One thing that I do need to go back to is in Moira's second life, I believe. She actually tries to live the exact same life that she lived in her first life, but then she found it mundane because the things that she fell in love with her husband about ended up kind of destroying her relationship.
Right.
Because she didn't
all those little quirks
all the
had,
annoyances
she
and
couldn't do it.
And having the children wasn't fulfilling enough for her anymore and stuff like that. And everything that she loved about her life in the first life, she actually hated in her second life.
So in the first life, she had 3 kids.
She had 3 kids in her first
second
life.
She had none.
She had none because she had no desire to have kids with him.
Right.
You know, she had no desire to have a family with him because she didn't love him. You know, and there was nothing wrong with him. She realized she just like is kind of over it, basically.
It's like you finding out all of your partner's flaws before you even get together with them.
Yeah.
You know?
So I mean, I think like the beauty of a relationship is in the discovery phase. Which the discovery ends up being your entire life, the rest of your life, right?
Exactly. If you get that information ahead of time,
I think
where do you?
But
how
I think
do you
that this
grow?
I think this is important for everything coming forth because if she was content living the same life over and over again, there would be no reason for her to figure out what's going on with her and all that stuff and meet Xavier. Yeah. Anyway, in this third life, again, she meets Xavier, but his arrogance kind of turns her off, and she decides to, screw Xavier. I'm not going to, deal with him or partner up with him or anything like that. And she devotes her life to finding a cure for mutantdom and mutation. And she succeeds in the cure
that gets her in
for
trouble.
mutation. But her lab is destroyed, and her colleagues are killed by Mystique, Pyro, and Destiny. And this is funny because, yes, she succeeds in creating a cure, so then why don't we actually have this cure in all these other timelines and this history that we've been reading X-Men?
But there's a reason for that, right?
And the reason for that is that Destiny's precognitive powers allow her to realize Moira is actually a mutant, invisible by standard mutant detection methods. But she warns Moira that if she ever decides to act against mutants again, Destiny will kill her before her X gene activates at the age of 13, which would kill her permanently. Mm-hmm. She also tells Moira that her powers are not infinite and that she will only have 10 lives or 11 if she makes the right choice in the end. And then Destiny then orders Pyro to burn Moira alive slowly so that she'll never forget this encounter.
Crazy.
Because if you guys remember, Moira remembers everything from all her lives.
She's got what is that called? Eidetic memory?
Eidetic memory, right?
Yeah,
but it's not just eidetic memory because that's like she can remember the pains also.
It's like eidetic.
And so that's serious because Destiny knows that she's gonna live, and she gave her the choice. She was like, look, if you keep trying to kill a mutation, I'm just going to kill you before you finish discovering this thing again.
Imagine,
so don't even try it.
Imagine being burned alive and actually knowing how death feels and coming back into life and actually know how that feels.
That is a hell of a deterrent.
So
that would drive me insane.
It definitely changed her mind.
So now, Moira, life number 4, okay, realizing that I can't even attempt to figure out the cure for mutation because I'm gonna die if I do. She gives up that and instead tries to figure out what's the problem between the mutant and human coexistence issues that are going on. So she again looks for Xavier at Oxford because now she realizes, well, I need to work with him. And it's at this point that they become lovers, which is important because this tells us that the X-Men universe that we've been living in has been Moira's fourth life.
Yep.
So everything that we've been reading up until this point has been Moira's fourth life.
And I love the way that they flashed those panels.
Right, yes.
You know, and they even mentioned the dark period, which was great.
Yeah.
You know.
So I mean, it's really cool how we're doing this with, like, you know, obviously we know that Moira has 10, possibly 11 lives. We don't know yet because that's going to be based off of like her decisions moving forward. But it's cool to know exactly where we do stand. So they didn't retcon they retconned the entire history of the X-Men universe, but in a cool way where they don't touch anything about everything that's happened in the comics. They didn't destroy anything that has been printed and created and stuff, which is cool because you don't want to destroy certain writers' legacies, the good or the bad. They just kind of compartmentalize it in Moira's fourth life.
It's all right there.
I think cool. In that fourth life, they go through what's essentially the Days of Future Past series of events.
Right. They create the school for the gifted in this.
Yes, exactly.
Timeline.
And she's eventually killed by Sentinels in this life. Okay, so Moira life number 5, have become radicalized by the experience of that fourth life and everything that's gone in our up until this point, our X-Men universe. She decides to meet Xavier even earlier and convince him to create an isolated haven for mutants. Nevertheless, the Sentinels eventually attack and kill Moira anyway in this line. So she's already kind of giving him the idea to, like, hey, let's do this whole Krakoa thing, you know, before it actually even happens. But she ends up getting killed before it can happen.
So I just got to make a quick point here before you get to the next one. Well, we're going to have to talk about this maybe even a little bit later on, because isn't it interesting that they don't mention what happens in her sixth life at all?
Right.
They do not
Well,
mention
that's what I was just going to say
comes
right now.
much later.
Yeah, that's what I was going to go into right now. I was going to see if anybody would pick it up. I was just going to go right over to Moira life number 7 and see if anybody picked it up. But yeah, Moira life number 6 is not revealed at the moment. They completely glance over it. They don't even mention it. They just immediately go into
it just goes straight to
Moira
the other
number
one.
7. And in the 7th life, Moira foregoes science entirely and instead becomes an assassin, dedicating her life to exterminating the entire Trask family to prevent the creation of the Sentinels.
Jason Bourne style.
Jason Black Widow style. I mean, it was sick. Yeah. Like, honestly, like, I think we spoke about this too, that it would be dope to have like a standalone comic of this life.
Yeah, that's
true. It would be so cool.
Moira the assassin.
But so she you know, dedicates her life to exterminating the entire Trask family to prevent the creation of the Sentinels, but they arise as an inevitable consequence of technological development and humans' fear of mutants. You know, like every single like coming of like movie that we've grown up with, you know, the machines will rise, essentially, is what the moral of that life is. And she's again, and they again exterminate mutant kind, right?
Which is becoming a common theme in all of these lives.
Yes. You know? So, Moira, now in her 8th life, she's even more radicalized, realizing she can't get through to Xavier. She can't put this whole like destruction of mutant kind down by her own hand. So she decides to partner up with Magneto this time instead of Xavier. But unfortunately, they're both defeated by the forces of Avengers and X-Men, and Moira dies during a failed prison escape. In the 9th life...
I'm sorry, Gabe, that was the one with Magneto? Where she
partners up with Magneto, but then, like, you know, the thing is that she can't tell them what's going on, right? And they all just believe that this is Magneto's, like, radicalization and all that. So, of course, the X-Men and the Avenger team up together to take them down.
Great panel, by the way.
Oh, that was one of the best ones because you have like the Avengers and the X-Men all like coming down from like the top of the page. Now we'll talk more about the art.
Yeah. Sorry.
And then we have Moira's 9th life, which is she's even more radicalized. So with every single passing life, she keeps getting like edgier and darker and like, you know, filled with more despair. And in this life, she decides to partner up with Apocalypse. And she says, you know what? Screw trying to figure out how to make them both work. but instead she goes to war with humankind. But we all know how this whole thing ends up with Apocalypse, right? Apocalypse doesn't prevail. Now she's in her last life, okay? We're in the 10th life, potentially her last life, and facing that, and the fact that this is her potential last life, she's looking back at all her experiences. Moira decides that in this timeline, she and Xavier will break all the rules. She meets Xavier in Oxford, and we go to the last page on this House of X is the first, I believe, one of the first pages in Powers of 10, which is Moira meeting Xavier at Oxford on the bench and asking him to read her mind, for which his eyes open wide in astonishment. And it's because he's now seeing all of the lives that she's lived, all of the experiences that she's gone through, and realizing that his dreams, the way that he wants to happen, won't come true.
Right.
And that's kind of where we are now.
Yeah.
So, what do you guys think of the Moira reveal, the lives, the information that we got in each one of her lives? I mean, this is like a bombshell issue. I mean, if you guys are collectors out there, I would highly recommend seeking out 3 or 4 of these copies, getting
Just
a few of them signed, because this is going to be one of those issues that's going to, it's a landmark issue. It's like the second issue of Origin, where Wolverine officially timeline wise pops his claws for the first time.
This is gonna be the next Secret Wars, but for X-Men. This is gonna be like the next big thing.
As far as you know, big events go, yeah, this is a huge event on that level. But you know, this whole Moira thing is insane. So
it had like an Edge of Tomorrow type of feel when I was reading this.
Right.
Yeah. It was like, you know,
like the whole rebooting your life.
You're dying, resetting. What's the next thing that's gonna
repeat?
You're right, exactly. How can I go a little bit further on the next life? Die, repeat, go a little bit further again. You know what I'm saying? It was really, really interesting how they did all of that. It was mind blowing, to be honest, right?
I would go so far as to say this is one of the most creative things I've ever seen or read anywhere. Because what's so great about it is, like you said earlier, this preserves. It's like both of you said earlier. You and Gabe said that this preserves everything that we've read in X-Men prior to this.
Exactly.
Right? None of that becomes like removed from the canon. It still happened. But what I love about this, I want to make this point first off, is because Moira McTaggart, the character, for me, has always felt a little shoehorned into X-Men. I understand her purpose.
That's very true.
Right?
That's very true.
I've always understood her purpose. Like, yes, she's a mutant researcher, all this great stuff. Fine, I understand that. But we never get a really detailed explanation. I mean, we get a little bit of detail, but we never get a really detailed explanation. Like, why the heck are you so interested? What makes you, like, so invested in mutants, so invested in Professor X, besides the fact that you fell in love with him? But she almost felt like we kind of pushed her into the storyline. And I think the beauty and the brilliance of this, that what Jonathan Hickman did, is we gave her the biggest purpose, really, in all of X-Men comics. She is the linchpin behind this and pretty much the whole Marvel universe, if you look at it that way. Yeah. Because every life that she lives, she influences the X-Men directly, which influences the entire universe of Marvel.
The only criticism I will have with the comic is that we don't get that sense. And I understand your point, because obviously it makes sense.
This particular comic,
right?
Like this
one.
issue,
right?
That kind of comes later, I feel like.
Right, but even then, we still don't get a sense of the Marvel universe as a whole. And,
no, right.
You know, so that's why I say this is the only slight criticism that I might have in terms of this comic run, because you're absolutely right. Every single time we have the timeline shift. And do we know, is this an erasure of the timeline, or is this a alternate timeline that we've just entered? I don't think we ever got a sense of that here, and we can talk about it later on when we get into the other things. But like you said, what is going on with the Marvel universe as a whole? We really don't get that sense too much. It makes sense of what you said, because obviously something has to change, right? Mm-hmm. But we don't get that from the comic. per se.
Well,
I think we're going to get that in Marvel Comics going forward. But go ahead, Eli.
Right, exactly.
from the way I see it, it seems like each of these lives are like, each once she dies, it goes to a random point in time. Because like there's this one timeline where she's still young and Charles Xavier is still young too, but just in the last life, she and Xavier were like fully grown. That's the sense that I'm getting, at least.
Right.
Well, that's kind of where they jump into the timeline more than anything else. It's not the way that the timeline goes.
AJ, what did you take from this?
I like the fact that I like this whole trial and error thing that she has going. Do this, doesn't work. Do this, doesn't work. And it just increasingly escalates. I was like completely blown away when she worked with Apocalypse. Like, what
That was
the
awesome.
hell?
That's what, like, it's cool because what if scenarios are always really, really cool. The only thing about what if scenarios is that they're usually never, ever in canon, right? Because it's always what ifs. This is like what if scenarios that are in canon, which is freaking awesome. Like, oh, what if she worked with Magneto? Oh man, what if all that stuff?
Take it anywhere because of her power. You can take the entire Marvel universe in any direction. I just want to say, like, really quickly, Apocalypse is one of my favorite parts of this entire thing. Like all of his interactions with all of the other mutants and all the other X-Men.
Wait, hold on, because we're not there yet.
I love it. No, we're kind of there at the beginning here. But just this little part alone where you see him getting involved in Moira's different lives. And then, like I said, I don't want to spoil too much, but this is all about mutants, so I think it's not too much of a spoiler to say that a lot of them get involved in different ways.
Right.
I love his interactions in this, and I love how things go, like, play out with him.
Well, that's one of the things about like this whole like relaunch is that they're not necessarily breaking the characters or just like kind of completely redesigning them from the ground up, but they're giving them more depth. I think I think Jonathan Hickman is doing such a great job of giving every single character, whether good or bad, no matter what history they have, the depth that they deserve in order to be fleshed out properly. So that's one of my favorite things. That's one of my favorite things, as opposed to like, hey, let's just drop in this bad guy and like let's make this happen. So, so yeah.
Perhaps my only criticism, now that you bring
criticism,
it up,
what?
Well, it's not like a full-fledged
I'm
criticism,
joking.
but like, Moira obviously has a very broken power. But like,
you like OP?
Kind of what Walt was saying. How does this figure into the greater Marvel universe? Because this is clearly tampering with time in a way.
I can't wait to talk about that.
Like that. Like once we complete the entire House of X and Powers of 10 series, we can talk about like the implications of the future in the Marvel universe, which still haven't really been at all like felt like if I haven't read anything in Iron Man or Hulk or anything that like deals with any of this yet.
I think you're gonna start seeing that. I think there's a comic book called Incoming that's coming out in March,
right?
And I think that's where you're going to start seeing the implications of what
happens. But they're introducing like a major villain there, right? Like a brand new major villain, I believe. I don't know much about it. I just saw like some
I will
of the,
say this:
the
sword that we see being utilized by one of the mutants in this title was featured prominently in one of their graphics. So but again, we don't know too much about it because they're kind of keeping that close to the vest. But sometime in March, I believe that's when we're going to start seeing that stuff.
Okay. I mean, I personally enjoy like all this being contained within the X-Men universe for now. You know what I mean? I do like it because
I unpack right now.
Yeah, I don't want them to like just rush this into the rest of Marvel. We have the rest of our lives to like get this intertwined. And Jonathan Hickman has like stated that he has already enough story development for the next 3 years of X-Men comic lines that are to reverberate for the next 20 to 50 years of the Marvel universe.
Jesus.
So he has done something it's supposed to set up all the X-Men lines for the next like 2 to 5 decades for the entire Marvel universe and all the writers to come after him. because I believe he's been on record to say that he's going to do basically like a 2 to 3 year run. And then he wants to lay the foundation down for the rest of the history of the X-Men universe and how it plays with the rest of the MCU. So.
Okay.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing, though, because I want to see how far-reaching he kind of goes into the other Marvel properties and into the MCU, because you can see the MCU TV shows and movies starting to connect in a way that they've never connected before. There's some small connection, usually, but now you have all these Disney Plus shows coming out that are going to directly affect the Marvel Cinematic Movie universe, and I feel like this is a way that he's going to bring X-Men into the MCU. I think that this is a way that can explain that, but it's kind of a tightrope to walk, because if you're just a fan of the movies and you have to start reading like X-Men and all this other stuff now to understand like what the heck's going on with this multiverse, what's going on with these timelines, it's going to get a little iffy, and I wonder how far they're going to extend into that, because I almost feel like you look at how things went with when the MCU was rolling out over the last 10 years and how they kind of lowered the role of mutants in the X-Men or in the Marvel comic books.
Right.
The mutants were kind of, their role was reduced. And that was kind of in response to like the fact that they couldn't use them in the MCU, and now they can. So now it almost seems like they're expanding their role to bring them into the MCU.
Well, it's funny because a little bit of X-Men history, X-Men as a comic book line was never really that popular until the 90s. And
that's true.
And because of this is why the writers were able to be really political, like whether it's from a religious standpoint or societal standpoint with the comic book, because the editors really didn't care what they did. They were like, hey, just like do whatever. So they created characters and storylines and inserted political views and stuff like that in the entire line, which ended up being the reason why it was so popular in the 90s, because now you have Generation X, which they saw themselves so much in some of these characters. But at the same time you have kind of like the last, let's say, the MCU era of films and stuff like that, where X-Men has taken a backseat, but I think that the reason it took a backseat was also because the X-Men universe was really, really kind of it became really convoluted.
That's
and
true also.
and
universe, right?
No, I'm talking about the comic book
also.
line. The comic book universe was just kind of all over the place, and there was
became
no
DC.
real way to like. It became worse than DC, and that's saying something.
I'm kidding. and
Sort of.
But the thing is that there was no real way to like wrangle up all these storylines from the last like 10 years or so, which nothing super major happened aside from like House of M, that happened in like the last couple decades, which was a huge thing, and a couple major things that were big but kind of fell flat. So I think, so I mean, I think it's awesome that they were able to, let's just cancel everything out, but let's put it all in Moira's fourth life. Let's not like, at least that's the way that I take it so far.
Right.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the art, because the art is a little bit different in this one than in the last couple issues in House of X1 and Powers of 10-1. And the reason I say that is because the panels are a little bit different, with all the different like timelines and how they're, they design the panels. I mean, me personally, I have a couple panels that I really, really want to talk about that I love. I think it was in the life where Moira decides to partner up with Xavier, and when they actually fell in love, and they start the X-Men and everything. In page 17 of this issue, you have a really cool like panel where they show the classic X-Men, and then you see the new X-Men with like Colossus and Wolverine and Storm and Nightcrawler and Cyclops. Then you see the next iteration of the X-Men until you finally see the Sentinels kill them. But I like that panel a lot. That's one of my favorite panels. And then And then my next favorite panel, which again, like, it's just the panel with Moira looking to assassinate the Trask family. That one's really, really cool. Like, her, like, just, like, peering down with the scope. But then in that one panel, you have 4 other panels mixed in together where you see, like, the death of the family and stuff. And I really, really enjoy that panel. Is there any other panels aside? I know that you really enjoyed the panel with Avengers and X-Men going down on Magneto.
Oh yeah, that was a great panel. That I actually, when that first came out, that was actually my iPhone wallpaper for a bit.
It's a sick panel, man.
It is great. It's just, you see all, and the thing about it is that the way it comes down to a point. You know what I'm saying? Like, Magneto is the pin of that point, and you see all of these heroes just falling down kind of like an arrow shape, right at him and stuff. But there were other, like I said, I loved that one is beautiful also.
Right,
the
next page. So
Apocalypse.
The panel that has that panel that we were speaking about with Avengers and X-Men going down on barreling down on Magneto, which looking at it,
be careful how you say that. So.
it's freaking amazing.
But,
wait,
sorry.
say what?
We gotta keep going.
Don't worry about it.
Yes.
No, I want to know
Jose
now.
caught it.
I want to
Caught
know.
it twice actually. But
Yeah.
you said it this time.
Barreling
Sorry.
down.
Keep it PG.
Going.
Keep going.
Oh, come on.
We're
Jesus
like
Christ.
big kids over here. We're sorry.
Yes, I know.
Go ahead.
Gutter mind.
He said it.
So that one is on page 22, and then immediately following that page is where we see Moira taking the hand of Apocalypse, which is awesome. It's like so, like, I mean, one thing about Apocalypse is that, like, he presumes to be a god, but he actually kind of walks and talks like he is a god, and I've always liked that about Apocalypse. He's walking the walk, really.
Yeah.
So
I actually like page 17 also. Page 17 it's more the significance of it, and you just passed it.
yeah.
That
one's
to
really
me is-
cool. I like this one.
Yeah, exactly. Page 17 has it's Moira's 4th life, and it shows classic age X-Men, it shows 90s X-Men, it shows the decade that should be forgotten.
2000, the let's forget about them X-Men.
Yes. And then that last one where you have the Sentinel.
That's the one that they say through the lost decade.
Yeah, exactly. And that last panel where you have the Sentinel blasting them. I just like the significance of that page right there.
AJ, any panels that like stand out to you? I mean, again, I'm looking at the art once again, just scanning through it, man. Like, they really went above and beyond because you can see like some of the emotions in Moira's face. All this stuff is really, really well done. Which I mean, I think like was obviously really important because of how important an issue this was. But man, I really, really love all the artwork that I have. AJ, what's your favorite panel?
So I love the entirety of page 24, and this would be Apocalypse, and the 4 horsemen, like they're about to go into battle, and they're gonna fight
that's
Nimrod.
Right. Yeah, yes.
And again, I'm sorry for bringing it back to DC.
Nimrod the Lesser.
Yeah. I'm sorry I'm bringing it back to DC, but again, this reminds me a lot of a panel that I saw in Darkseid War. And I completely...
Well, nobody disagrees that DC has good art. Just terrible stories. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm a Marvel fanboy. So, Eli, is there anything that kind of like struck out at you as far as like the art wise and stuff like that? Anything because you're our resident artist. If you guys don't know, Eli is like our little resident artist. He goes to art school. He's doing 3D animation, the whole nine. He's super sick.
I'm like actually cracked when it comes to like art. No lie.
What does that mean?
Oh, whatever.
I don't know.
He's
what
so
you're talking about.
good.
No, you can't give us some slang and then not tell me. I know I'm old, but dang, what does it mean to be cracked?
Like good. Like fire means like
So it's like I'm cracked in jiu-jitsu? Is that what?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like, I'm cracked at Soul Calibur when you're not.
Oh.
So.
Ooh,
Those are
oh my
fighting
God.
words.
Straight
Oh my
burn.
God! Oh,
You really
Hold
found
on.
you found a way to dig.
Get
at
the
what
fire
happened,
extinguisher.
like an hour and a half ago. That's incredible. I actually give you some props for
I
that.
give you a little bit. Of, that's a good little callback.
That was a cracked burn.
punk. Don't forget that I choke you out on a regular basis.
Oh, yeah.
Child abuse.
Yeah.
In jujitsu, they
Kidding.
signed a waiver.
Kidding.
I'm allowed to kill him. So yeah. I mean, what did you think of the art in this issue?
There are two places that I really like the art. One you already mentioned.
Which one?
The part where Moira is getting burned.
Oh yeah, that's right.
The emotion in her face, it's just so. She seems so angry, and then, kind of like when. And one thing that I also liked about this scene was Destiny. Destiny was a very interesting character.
Destiny is very interesting because she's.
It's kind of like OP a little bit too, in the same sense as Moira, but I guess
She's a precog.
when you have two OP characters kind of facing off to like kind
Yeah.
of decide where the future of this whole thing is going to go, that makes it a little interesting.
I mean, Moira's only OP because she's so smart, right? But at the same time, like you get like somebody that doesn't know what to do with their life.
I mean,
they're
her
just gonna
mutant
keep
powers-
reliving and eating McDonald's. For
Well,
the
it's
rest.
like, it's like AJ said, her mutant power is a little OP, but I really love what they
You
did.
think
with
so?
it. I mean, yeah, the ability to like go through all of your lives and do whatever.
Well, let
you
me ask
want
you a
with
question.
That, like
Right,
check
right.
that timeline.
Yeah,
And
but
she
that's
can
not
hide
that
herself
OP, right?
also.
Because let's
Yeah.
You know, she can hide herself also because again, the only reason
we're not there yet.
Like I don't want to
but
criticize it.
They already explained
you know?
that they said that. Remember when Destiny was saying,
Oh yeah.
you have the ability to hide yourself as a mutant.
Right,
but we
right,
found
right,
you
yeah.
because you found the cure.
Yes.
You
That's
know
true.
what I'm
That's
saying?
true. That's
You
true.
know, I don't mean to criticize, but in a sense, like this is a mind. She's like beyond Omega level.
No,
Well
not
beyond.
at all. Not at all.
You don't think so?
She's just smart with what she's doing. Look, let me ask you this.
No,
Hold on.
Omega level
If we
was defined
if
here.
we gave Butthead the same power, okay, do you really think that he's gonna like figure out how to save humanity?
Maybe.
But I think Omega level is a little too big for
Yeah.
her because
He'll build
she
a better
has the
taco.
ability
Nobody
to-
else has this power.
No, I
and,
know.
and it's limitless. If you think
Well,
about
not
it.
No,
really.
no. She only has
She's
10
only got
lives.
10.
Somebody told her that, but we don't know that.
Okay, but
We
let's
don't know
put-
that.
But she's
That's-
a precog.
It's a precog. It's
You know what I'm
destiny.
saying? But the other thing is that the only real ability that she has is to be able to go back and relive her life. Now, you know, again,
That,
she can
that kind of makes
shape-
her God, though, man. She
But
can
No, it
shape
does
the
not.
entire universe.
Not
Not
at all.
really, because you know she's shaping only a particular segment of the universe. She's not.
And she can die at
creating-
birth if she like. I mean,
Right,
like
yeah,
it's
I
not
know.
like like.
So if you can say that you know she goes back and she can alter reality, then I say absolutely she's Omega. But right now she's taking small steps and failing each time.
Yeah.
So that's
And-
why I
and-
don't consider her as an Omega level mutant.
also-
See, it's
You know
not
what I'm
about outcomes when you're talking about Omega, because Omega level mutants lose all the time. I don't think it's about the outcome. I think it's about the potential of this power, because this power literally can change the entire comic
Right,
universe,
but the thing is that-
including the MCU. Like,
Yes,
you're going into
but again,
every
but
single
again,
iteration. Of
but
this.
again, like it's not the potential of power; it's the potential of her intellect, right? Because it's
Yeah,
you know,
it's
it's
her
just the
actions.
fact that she's as smart as she is to use that, not her power. You
Well,
know what
I'll
I mean?
concede this point though, because I don't want to like harp
Right.
on it too much, and you
Yeah.
guys definitely have a point. When
Like
it
the-
I mean,
There's
my thing is,
another
look,
character-
if she really is on life 10, then that's it. She has no more mutant power.
there's another character that's there, David Haller, who is Legion, right?
Hey, yeah.
That-
Right.
He is an Omega level mutant
Yes,
because
yes.
he has the ability to reshape, you know, reality
Yeah.
and stuff. That to me, that's but like I said, not to belabor the point.
Yeah.
You know, let's continue with
Let's
this.
agree to sort of disagree,
Right,
because
exactly.
I kind of
You
agree
know.
also. But
Yeah.
I just wanted to make that point. I think,
But
AJ
it's a good point.
kind of
It's a good
feels
point. It's a
a
good
little
point.
the same way, right, AJ? Like
So-
sorta, but maybe not entirely.
So being that Eli is the only person at this table that has not fully read everything. What do you think so far? Like, where do you think that this is awesome? Actually, where do you think that that the series is gonna go from here?
Hold on, there's just one last thing
Oh,
that
sure.
I want to mention. there's this one scene where it's like, I'm just gonna make this real quick. One scene where it shows like the classic X-Men and how like it's really good artwork on this panel.
What panel? What page is that? We're looking at page 17.
And it's literally just classic X-Men, Cyclops, this dude, what's his name?
Well, the top panel, that's Colossus.
You're gonna make you freaking read the last.
Colossus, yo.
Make you read the
Yeah,
last
they show
30
the
years of
Colossus?
X-Men.
Well, right.
You don't know who Colossus is?
He's a
I
kid.
forgot,
That's
I
why.
Oh my god.
Well, they show the original X-Men, right? You got Cyclops, Jean
Oh, so we're
Grey,
back on page
Beast,
17.
Yeah.
and Angel.
With
And
that,
then-
And then
that
you have the
dude.
newer X-Men with Cyclops, Storm, Colossus, or I'm sorry, that dude, and Wolverine. And then you have every iteration of the X-Men as they've been rebooted
Yes.
and redone over the years, which is a cool panel. I agree.
Yeah.
with that dude.
With that dude, yeah.
All right, so from now on, Colossus is gonna be now known as the
That-
dude.
No, don't do that.
That dude over
I
there.
actually like him.
That
so,
dude over there.
You know.
So yeah, so where do you think that this is gonna go as far as like the next few issues? Do you have any kind of inclination? What do you think it's gonna happen? What do you think is gonna happen between like now that Xavier knows everything, essentially everything that Moria's gone through, and we've already seen some of what he's doing in the first issue
I
of
think
House
I
of
might
X.
have read ahead.
Sorry.
No, I know you're on Powers of 10 issue number 2, so you are. But where do you think this is gonna what kind of implications do you think that this has for the entire future of the X-Men?
Yeah, like now that you know that she has all these lives, and
Do you
she
think
can
that they're
play
gonna
around.
succeed?
Will
Huh?
they win?
No way. No.
Jesus, that's a quick no way. Wow. Why don't you think they're gonna succeed?
Huh? I
Why don't
know.
you think that they're gonna succeed? You mean
First
like
of all-
Xavier and Magneto? You don't think that the team up can kill it?
I have a feeling that
Killing it, boy.
Professor X is gonna die.
Interesting.
Okay.
Okay.
Magneto.
When is he gonna die? Is the question. Which power?
Which power of 10? Oh, that's easy.
Remember, it's 1 year, 10 years, 100 years, and 1,000 years. It seems
Year
like in this timeline, though, he's long dead in
Year
the 100 and
100.
1,000 year.
Year 100.
Oh yeah, I mean,
The war.
okay.
You know what?
So
No,
you predict
the
that
Ascension.
Xavier is definitely gonna die.
Huh?
Do you think that he's gonna die
No.
like an early death
Huh?
or like a natural death? Like where do you said that you think he's gonna die,
Horrible death.
but how
This
do you
requires some thinking, but
Bad death.
off of the top of my head, I'm just gonna come up with this right now.
think? Okay.
So it's gonna be a quick thing. Could you guys just give me a second? Just give me a second.
Well, I mean, after this, we're gonna go into reviews
okay,
of
okay.
this first section.
I
so.
think Professor X is going to die a not horrible death. He's not going to be ripped apart from the insides and
God.
lasered doing or something.
So it's not gonna be a fatality.
Okay.
You know what?
Fatality.
I think
Just say it.
Go for
I
it.
think that Magneto.
The only question that I have is, do you think that, or maybe not Xavier and Magneto, but
Xavier's gonna die, and the Ascension. Okay. He's gonna die, and the Ascension person, that blue guy with the mark on his.
we're not there yet. That's gonna be the next issue.
I know, but I didn't finish that issue.
I know. Well, then, you know what?
should
We're
move
gonna
on. We
we're
should
gonna
move on.
move
We should
on
move
from
on.
here, right? So
Okay,
We'll get to it.
Right before we finish Powers of X3, I believe.
uh,
That's when
We're
you can
not
ask
there
me.
yet.
That's when you can ask me. Okay.
all right. So then after the next segment of issues, we'll revisit where you think the future of the X-Men's gonna go. So with that being said, that's kind of that's the very first 3 issues of this kind of timeline, even though it's House of X1, Powers of 10-1, and then House of X2. Those 3 issues combined, because I think that they formulate the first major story arc of the this relaunch.
Things start to move very quickly after this, right?
Yeah. I mean, they do. There's a lot more. Obviously, we've gotten all the setup. We've gotten the world building,
Yep.
right? We've gotten the future world building, and then we've gotten the major reveal that has the ripple effect for the entire thing. Oh, and speaking of ripple effects, there's one thing. We're talking about data dumps, right? At the very end of the issue, we didn't speak about this, but at the very end of the issue, we have a 2-page panel that denotes the many lives of Moira X. Okay, or of Moira 10 rather, which to me is why it's called the Powers of 10, because it's the powers of Moira's 10 lives. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number 6 is completely missing from here. 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, and it shows an orb with all the lines from left to right. The orb represents the year 13 of Moira's life, where her mutant manifestation actually takes place. And it's at this point that she can now resurrect after she dies. If she died before the 13th year, then her powers are not accessible, which is maybe that's why she doesn't have a life number 11. Maybe she died in life number 11 before she was 13. Anyway, we go into the second panel and notes all the different events, which is really, really cool. It's a nice like picture of everything that we just read, and the different points in her life, different important points in her life. And I believe it even shows her deaths. Now, this is important. In the first life, she dies. Let's go through the deaths, right? Through like how her life ends. In the first life, she dies at the age of 74 of congestive heart failure. In the second life, after finding out that she's actually a mutant, she dies in a plane crash. Third life, she dies in a laboratory fire, which is when Pyro killed her. The fourth life, she dies in a sentinel attack. The fifth life, she is injured in a sentinel attack and placed in a coma. And then she dies at the genocide at Faraway. The sixth life, again, isn't here. So the seventh life, she dies after discovering Wild Master Mold facility. In the eighth life, she dies in a failed prison escape. The next life, the Apocalypse War begins, and they don't show when she dies. They just show a continuation of arrows that denote, I guess, like a continued life, which is important because they don't actually show that she died, and I actually don't think that they even mention that she died in the book. So, is this a separate timeline? You know? Do we have like a whole like going back in time type of thing?
Doesn't that one go like kind of far into the future? We don't see her death, but we see her in the year 100 in that timeline, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, right, but we still don't see the death. So then, like, how did she live? How is she alive in her 10th life? Then?
Yeah.
How does she have the information from life number 9 and life number 10 if she hasn't died yet?
Yeah.
If you remember, and we will find out soon enough, because in number 10 again. Oh, in her 50th year, she fakes her death, and then at the age of 52 is when House of X actually starts. So that's kind of like the timeline of her entire life so far to this point, as far as like the events that took place when she died and where we're at right now. Again, if we can like kind of go around, do a little bit of a rating, I'd like to think that like based on like our rating system, we should do. This is the first time that we're reviewing comic books and ongoing comics and stuff like that. I want to propose a 1 to 10 rating, where if it's a 1 to 5, you don't need to read it. Okay, we read it for you, we reviewed it for you, and we tell you that you should not ever read these books or whatever, unless you're like a super fan and have to have these books. Like for example, if you're like a DC lover, you might like do a 1 out of 5 rating and still buy the books. Or if we rate it from 6 to 10, then you most likely should own it and have it, or at least borrow it from somebody, download it in the app so that you can read it yourself and enjoy it. So where do you guys fall on the ratings?
Okay, so me, I am flat out gonna say like
On this first three, just these
the
first
first three? Yeah,
Okay,
no.
just these first three
on,
so
on
far.
these first three, I am absolutely gonna give it a 10. Absolutely, because like I've said to a few people like this is, and I said a little bit earlier, this is one of the most mind blowing and most interesting reveals that I've seen in almost any form of media. Okay, because of the way that it kind of opens up the Marvel universe, both cinematic and comic book. It opens it up. It opens it up in a really really interesting and really really great way, without, how do I put this? Like without being too campy, too cliche, too odd, too weird.
Okay.
With good writing, good art, like the way that it opens up possibilities throughout all forms of Marvel media, I think is something that can't be understated. I think that makes
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, I think that makes this really amazing. Again, I really like the fact that we finally get some idea like why the heck Moira has been around the X-Men all this time. And I mean, like
Yeah,
I
that's
want to
true,
go
too.
back
I
and
mean,
read
the
it
depth,
again.
yeah.
Right? Like, I want to go back and read this again, probably multiple times to try to figure out what the heck could happen, what's going on, like, why certain lives are missing, why certain lives don't have, like, the specifics of her death.
Right,
Like, I
right,
want to
right.
go back through that to try to figure out a little bit more about what's going on. And, like, just to, again, to really kind of denote how amazing this reveal was, like, I talked to a few friends about it, and I'm like, without giving away too much, I'm like, so I did tell them, like, this comic does give you a little bit more insight into why Moira is important in X-Men comics, and they all kind of said the same
She's
thing. They're
the
all
most
kind of like,
important person in the entire universe.
yeah.
And the
And
whole
they-
X-Men universe.
Exactly. They've also, like, most of them have all said the same thing as I have. Like, yeah, it's true. Like, what the heck is she doing there? Why is she around? And then, like, all of them have tried to guess, like, what it is that fits Moira into this universe and what her like power is. I didn't say it was a power, but they were all like guessing powers
Yeah.
and like other things.
Right.
Nobody's even come close. Not even close.
Right.
So for me, like, just the creativity alone is also something that's really, really, really amazing and interesting about this. So like, yeah, for me, it's a flat out 10. I love these comics so far.
Walter, do you want to give us your rating?
I'm there with Jose, but I won't give it a 10. Only because I don't give it 10s. Okay.
I don't usually either,
Yeah,
but this is
I
amazing.
don't
That's
give it
true.
10.
I was actually surprised that you gave it a 10 because
Yeah.
I don't think I know you as the kind of person that gives 10s to anything.
Yeah.
I
But
tend to be
Walt
critical.
definitely doesn't like to give a 10 to
I
anything.
don't like to give 10s out because I've yet to see a perfect piece of art. You know what I'm saying? There's always a little something that you can kind of, dig your hooks into and say, okay, there's a little plot point here, or there's something that doesn't make sense.
Well, I will say this, like, I am allowing a little room in rating it as a 10. I am allowing a little room for, like, a couple of small issues here and there because, like you said, there's nothing that's going to be
But just,
perfect.
you know what it is?
Sorry.
Just the impact. I do get you. The impact
Right.
is so
Yeah.
huge. So yeah, go on.
So I'll go 9.5. And again, it's just because I don't like to give 10s out, but for everybody that's out there that thinks that comic books is a medium for kids, I would like to point them out to this.
Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, exactly. I would like to point them out to this book because this book is very mature. It's very intelligent in the things that it does. It
It's
world
extremely
builds.
intelligent.
Yeah,
I mean,
it
it's-
world builds. It doesn't pander to any fan service that much. Where there have been certain things that have come out in recent months that do.
Well, like Gabe said, like, this gives everyone a reason to be. Every character.
Right, exactly.
Has a role in this.
And again, that's why I say it's a mature, intelligent title. The story works in fleshing those characters out and giving them meaning in this universe. I think if you are a comic book person, you definitely have to read this book.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're a non-comic book person that is looking to get into comics, I think this is now I will say this, it can be a little jarring and a little bit confusing, especially that second issue.
Right.
The first issue of Powers of X.
yeah.
But again, if you give it time and you let it flesh out and stuff like that, that's when you're going to appreciate the title for what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm when we were reading it, right? We were going crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, I could not wait for the next issue to come out.
Exactly.
And I haven't felt about comics like that in a really long time.
Me neither.
If ever, to be honest.
And listen, I haven't had the time really to read, and we were discussing this
Yeah.
before. But this was a title that the minute that it came out, we were on it and we were reading it, you know, and it was that important. It drew you in that much. So, if you
9.5.
if you haven't read it, please go out and read it. I think it's important, and like Jose said, this may influence the MCU in ways that we still don't know about.
I think this is part of why WandaVision got pushed up, honestly. But I'm sorry,
Correct.
go ahead.
Maybe, yeah. It makes sense.
So I'm going to give it a 9. I'm not someone who generally likes to give a perfect 10, even though sometimes biases will put me as close as 9.9.
Okay.
But
Godzilla, Supernatural,
well,
DC.
you know, it's actually
DC.
funny because
Halo.
I don't like to do this, but I think Witcher's becoming my new Supernatural
Wow.
Very nice.
I thought
because
so.
of.
Here.
But hey, stick to the
Yeah,
comics,
I
stick to
know.
the
Okay. So
comics. Wrong episode.
Toss a
Witcher
coin to
episode
your
coming
Witcher.
soon, promise.
So I give it a 9 because it's a very enjoyable read. The things that it sets up, there's a lot of potential. The reason why I'm giving it a 9 and not a 9.5 is because of my little nitpick with this power is very, very far-reaching, and to have it only contained to the X-Men so far is a little like, okay, but there are other stuff out there. But I get at the same time that you don't want to branch out to everything just yet.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I
you
think
still
that's
got to
gonna take
build.
time.
You got to let this simmer. You don't.
I know,
like-
but this is just a little nitpick of mine. But
Well,
that's something else.
Can you consider maybe when we go down the road and we've gone through a little bit of how this affects the wider comics universe, like will that maybe change your mind as you see where it goes?
So I do kind of want to stray away a little bit from. I don't want I think that it's better if we're gonna judge the comics. We want to judge these comics, just these 3.
Yeah.
Understanding that this is just one part of the arc. Do you feel like as the beginning part of the arc, if it's fulfilled so far? I mean, does it?
It's a super strong start.
Yeah, right?
It's a super strong start.
So, as far as the other implications, we can talk about the implications after we've read the series, I think. So, but yeah, totally get where you're coming from. So, Eli, ratings. Remember, you're probably the harshest rater because I think
I am.
Everything is corny.
8 out of 10.
Yeah, so and 8 out of 10. Okay.
Oh, you know what?
There-
8.2 out of 10.
Oh no! We're only going
Let's do
5s.
halves.
It's half.
Eight,
That's
eight.
it. Okay.
8 out of 10.
Okay. Cool. We're still super respectable, right? I mean, we're still up in that top percentage. What made you say 8 and not 9?
Well, things that I liked about it. I like their choice of words.
The dialogue.
The dialogue, especially with Nimrod the Lesser.
Hey.
I've been reading a lot of stuff, and whenever
It's kind of like a troll, right?
huh?
He kind of trolls people.
Yeah, I know he does that.
He trolls humanity
He does.
and
And
mutantdom, rather.
I really like the art too. It's lighting, like you said. But the thing that I really don't like is
Go ahead.
its corniness.
Oh God.
How is it corny, though? I don't think-
how it's corny.
I don't
but,
think you know what this word means.
Yeah, I don't. It's all right.
Like,
if he thinks
okay,
it's corny, it's corny.
No, not corny. Not corny. It's just at some points it can be predictable.
Oh, there's nothing predictable.
I don't believe that at all.
You
That-
cannot say Moira being a mutant was
Oh,
predictable.
No, there are some points. Only some points.
What, like what? Like I give you room to have your own opinion, but here I don't understand at all. I have to be honest. Like what is
So
predictable? about
defend
this
your
storyline?
position here.
Like Magneto joining forces with Professor X.
That's pretty far out there. I'm not.
Why
gonna
is
lie.
that predictable though?
Huh?
That's really.
That's not
far out
predictable at
there.
all because
That's predictable.
Not at all. That's kind of one of the biggest points in X-Men history is the fact that Magneto has never been able to see eye to eye with Xavier.
Oh no, I predicted that though. That was predictable for me. I don't know why. Well, that's because I don't know much.
Well, it's also
about,
the very first issue.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know much about X-Men, so that's why
Okay.
It's predictable. Like,
Okay.
Well, I guess from that
Yeah.
standpoint, right? Like, if you don't have like if you don't have the history of Charles and Eric Lensher, Magneto, you don't know that like they're friends
Yeah,
and
they
they
were.
have they have essentially the same goals, but how they want to go about the goals are completely opposite each other.
Yeah.
And it's been 50 years of what is it now? It's more than 50 years of struggle, I think, at this point, between Magneto and Xavier. So
Yeah.
I think I give that point a little more credence also because most of your experience might be from the movies where they have teamed up many times.
yeah, that's true too.
In both iterations.
Yeah,
in
I
both
guess
the
so. I can
Patrick
see
Stewart
from your
and all that.
perspective.
Eli is more of an anime guy. A manga guy. You read more manga than you do comics.
You do.
So,
You do.
Yeah, you do.
I don't know.
Yeah, you do.
No, I know
Yes,
now.
we do.
So So like you said, his experience is mostly the films and stuff. So
Right.
That's true, and unfortunately, those aren't the best. Again, you're in the lost decade, so.
All right. I'll
So-
give you that's a legitimate defense. I'll give
Okay.
you
So
That works.
so I want to say that it's a 9 out of 10, only because I personally I would want to give it a 10, but the reason I give it a 9 out of 10 is mainly because of that first Powers of 10 issue, which was a little bit difficult to get through.
Right.
I remember having to reread it like 3 times the very first time I read it, just so that I can try to understand it, right? And that's perfectly fine because as a fan of comics, I like rereading things anyway, so I can, first time I go around, I want to read the story, and second time I want to kind of enjoy the artwork more by understanding what the eventuality of the story is going to be and so on and so forth. But this one, I was reading it just to kind of follow along, and I think that for it to be a first issue, I like what they did in the sense where it was very different, showing like the year 1, 10, 100, and 1,000, but I think it could have been done a little bit cleaner.
Yeah.
Because later on we'll see that like it was done to kind of like keep this format going for the rest of Powers of 10, but I don't think it was done as strongly as it could have been in the first.
It's a
for the
hard
first
introduction.
Issue. Yeah, it's a hard introduction.
Yeah.
So,
But
I think they could have been a little bit better building of like Nimrod. Like I don't remember too much of Nimrod from back in the day. So
he's in Days of Future Past.
Yeah, I know,
isn't he?
but I haven't read Days of Future Past since I
In a
was a
while, I
teenager.
guess, yeah.
So, and we're talking like 20 years now.
Okay.
So, and the movies never had
No.
Nimrod.
Yeah.
So, which is, there was no way that we're going to be able to do that. But
yeah,
pull
that
off.
first issue was a little tough.
It was a little tough, so-
it makes
so-
sense once you get through the titles. But again,
Right.
as a starting point, it is a little difficult
So
to follow.
see, for me, if I were to rate the issues individually, it'd be House of X1 a 10, Powers of 10 an 8, or even a 7.5. But
Okay.
I'll stick to an 8, and then the Moira issue a 10 for sure, because that reveal is huge, and the ramifications of that reveal, is obviously like a big deal for all the X-Men comics before it. But aside from that, it's mainly like the art in the books was amazing. One thing that I like to denote about the art is that like it's very clean looking, and I think it's because of, to your point, like the things that they do with like some of the color choices, and the sceneries, is they're keeping it simplistic by sticking to color themes on the page, so that it's very easy to see what you're looking at. As far as the environment, the characters itself, what's going on and stuff like that, it keeps it looking very, very clean. And I think that's important when you have a story that's like so, I guess, intricate, where like the art needs to be like on par and stuff like that. So, but yeah. Anyway, so I think that's kind of our review of the first 3 issues in the House of X Powers of 10 series.
There is a lot to go through with these comics.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's a little more complicated, though. Like you said, these first couple issues, it's a little hard to unwrap.
Right,
then,
right.
like,
There's
it
a
gets
lot more to
linear
deal with, yeah.
it's a little more straightforward as things go on once you understand like the overarching concept. But yeah, like anyway, guys, like that's our take on the first few episodes of House of X and Powers of 10. We're gonna get into this in a lot more detail. We have another episode coming up, which is going to explain a little bit more about what we think about the other comics and how that's going to affect the Marvel Comics universe, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But as always, Oh, I'm sorry. What's
No. I just wanted to for everybody that's listening out there, if you're reading along with us, the next issues in line. Which again, if you're picking up the issues, you have it at the back of the back cover of the book. The next 3 issues, which we're going to be reviewing, are going to be Powers of 10-2, Powers of 10-3, and then House of X 3, and that'll be our next episode.
Which is where the issues kind of jump around in an order that you don't necessarily expect.
Exactly. So.
Oh yeah, and I'd also like to say, like, screw you, Minnesota Vikings. You guys suck and you lost. And I'll be seeing you soon, Lyle Blackwood. I'll be seeing you soon. Anyways, we want to thank you guys for joining us in this episode once again. It was a great discussion about the X-Men comics, the relaunch by Jonathan Hickman. And we can't wait to talk about it a little bit more. We can't wait to see where this goes, but that's all going to be in future episodes over the next couple of years, apparently. As always, guys, thanks for joining us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Search for us on Google. Check us out on Facebook. Check us out on Instagram. You can find us pretty much anywhere. Get Geek Podcast, getgeek.com. And signing off, this is Jose.
This is Wolfie.
AJ.
This is Walt.
Oh, Eli?
With the catchphrase.
No.
He's got nothing. As always, guys, thanks for listening in. Share, rate, subscribe, and as always, stay geeky, my friends.